My name is Gil Carver. I'm 57 years old. And last spring, my son asked me to stay home from his wedding because his bride's mother had decided I wasn't the right kind of person to be seen at her event. I agreed. I stayed home, and I had no idea that the man who'd let her make that decision had spent 2 years desperately trying to find me. There's a reason Clive Hargrove went the color of old chalk when he opened that insurance file. There's a reason I didn't fight back, didn't show up where I wasn't wanted, didn't use what I had. You'll understand both by the time I finish here. Let me take you back to the first week of March, the morning the envelope arrived at the shop. It came on a Tuesday, cream-colored, heavy stock, with a small gold anchor embossed in the corner. Paige's touch, I figured. My son Reed had been with her 3 years by then, and she was the kind of person who thought about details like that. I liked her for it. I sat at my workbench with a cup of coffee and my reading glasses and opened it slow. Reed Allen Carver and Paige Elizabeth Hargrove, June 14th, a venue in Annapolis. I set the card down and just sat there. Reed was getting married. My boy, who used to fall asleep in the boat with a fishing rod still in his hands, was getting married. I called him that night. He didn't answer, so I left a message that probably embarrassed him. Said I was proud. Said his mother would have been proud too. May died when Reed was 15. Breast cancer. She fought it 2 years, and then she was gone, and I raised him the rest of the way alone. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling it so you understand who I am and what Reed means to me. He's the whole second half of my life. 3 days later, he called back. His voice had something careful in it from the first word. Dad, he said, I need to talk to you about the wedding. I've got it on the calendar, I said. Already know what I'm wearing. Silence. It's complicated, he said. I set my coffee down. Go ahead. He told me about the Hargroves. Nadine and Clive, old Maryland money. They'd built a resort and marina business over 30 years, 3 properties along the bay. Their guests were the kind of people who owned boats and didn't clean them. Nadine, he said, was very particular about how things looked. She was hosting the wedding. She was paying for most of it. And she had some thoughts about the guest list. What kind of thoughts? I said. Reed went quiet then. She thinks it might be better if you weren't there. The people coming, her business partners, some investors, she's worried about appearances. She thinks a boat repairman will embarrass her at their table, I said. I don't think that. I want you there. Reed, is this what you want or what someone wants for you? He didn't answer. That silence told me more than anything he could have said. He came to the shop that weekend. Drove 90 minutes on a Friday evening after work. He stood in the middle of the floor with his hands in his pockets and couldn't look me in the eye, which is not something Reed does, because I raised him to meet people's gaze. Tell me everything, I said. So he did. Nadine Hargrove had told Paige, and Paige had told Reed, that bringing a boat mechanic to an event of caliber would send the wrong message, that the look of it mattered, that Reed's father, quote, seemed like a perfectly good man, but not quite the right fit for this setting. I looked at my hands while he talked. 40 years of marine work had written themselves into those knuckles. Fiberglass resin, mahogany stain, the particular grime that gets into your skin when you're rebuilding an engine that hasn't run in 25 years. I have never once been ashamed of any of it. And you told her what? I said. I told her you were my father, Reed said. His voice was tight, and she said, Of course, sweetheart. But these things have a way of defining people before they get the chance to speak for themselves. I walked to the far end of the shop, where the Meridian sat under her canvas cover. I pulled back one corner and looked at the bow. Deep varnished mahogany, every plank hand-fitted, 22 feet of a 1949 Chris Craft Riviera that had been sitting in a salvage yard for 18 years when I found her. She'd won the National Wooden Boat Show Restoration Award in 2019. She now sat on permanent loan at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, but I brought her back every winter for her annual inspection. I let the canvas fall. I'm not going to make your wedding a battlefield, I told him. That's not what your mother would have wanted either. Dad, let me finish. I turned around. If I show up where I haven't been invited, I'm not walking into a reception. I'm starting a war, and you're standing in the middle of it on the one day that should just be yours. I won't do that to you. He left an hour later. He hugged me in the driveway for a long time, the way he used to when he was small. I held on and didn't say anything, because some things don't need words between a father and a son. After he drove away, I went out to the water. There's a stretch of shoreline 2 miles from the shop where I can sit on an old dock and watch the bay. On a clear evening, the light comes off the water in a way I don't have the language for. May loved that dock. We used to bring sandwiches there on Sunday mornings before Reed was born. I sat until the sky went dark and then sat some more. I thought about Nadine Hargrove, who had never built anything with her hands, deciding what I was worth. I thought about Reed, who had watched me rebuild engines and sand hulls and pour ballast in 40-degree weather so he could have a decent pair of shoes and a school trip to Washington. I thought about May, who would have known exactly what to say right now, and who was not here to say it. I drove home. There was a letter on my workbench I hadn't opened. It had come in Thursday's mail, return address a law firm Whitmore & Associates. I'd set it aside because I figured it was a contract matter, and that week my heart had no room for paperwork. I let it sit. I put my keys down next to it and went to bed. The week that followed was quiet in the way that isn't really quiet. I went to work. I inspected a 67 Bertram that needed a new fuel system. I answered emails. I ate dinner alone and watched the evening news and didn't think about the wedding if I could help it. My friend Stu came by the shop on Thursday. He's been around long enough to read my face like a tide chart, and he sat on the dock out back and asked what happened. I told him. He said some things about Nadine Hargrove I won't repeat. I appreciated every word. But I told him the same thing I'd told Reed. I wasn't going to show up and turn this into a scene. That's you being too decent for your own good, Stu said. Could be both, I said. He shook his head when he left. I let him. That night I wrote Reed a text. I rewrote it 3 times. I'm not a man who finds the soft as easily. I know load tolerances and hull integrity, and the grain of teak versus white oak. The other language comes harder. Finally I wrote, Reed, I love you more than any work I've ever done. If staying home makes your day easier, I'll stay home. Nothing changes between us. Go be happy. Love, Dad. He replied in 2 minutes. Just, I love you. I'm so sorry. I set the phone face down on the workbench and didn't pick it up again that night. I won't tell you it didn't hurt. It did. It sits in a particular place, behind the ribs, and it doesn't move. To be told by your own child that the hands that raised him are something to keep out of sight. That's a specific kind of pain, and I won't dress it up as anything easier than what it was. But I meant what I'd told Stu. I wasn't staying home to teach anyone a lesson. I was staying home for Reed. I thought that was the whole shape of the story. A man steps aside, keeps his pride quiet, and life goes on. I was wrong. It was barely the beginning. 10 days before the wedding, I finally opened the letter from Whitmore & Associates. It was formal and careful, the way legal correspondence is. The summary: their client, Hargrove Marine Holdings, LLC, possessed a collection of 11 vintage wooden vessels with an informal appraisal of $4.2 million, stored at their Tilghman Island property. Hurricane damage the previous September. The insurance company, before releasing settlement funds, required an independent appraisal from a recognized maritime heritage expert. The letter cited my specific credentials, my certification through the American Society of Appraisers, my documented work with the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, the Restoration Awards, and formally requested that I conduct the appraisal. I read it twice. Then I sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Hargrove Marine Holdings, Clive and Nadine Hargrove, the family that had spent the past month quietly deciding I wasn't fit to sit at their tables. Their $4.2 million insurance claim couldn't move without my name on a document. The two halves of this thing slid together in front of me like tumblers in a lock. I won't tell you the thought didn't cross my mind. I'll be honest. It did. I sat there and felt the pull of it. A man who could be unavailable. Who could find professional reasons to take his time, to request additional documentation, to let delays accumulate while Nadine Hargrove waited for a check that wouldn't come without me. It would have been quiet. No one would have known why. I didn't do it. I want to be plain about the reason, because it's the center of everything. I have worked in this field for 35 years. I have put my name on documents affecting millions of dollars in value, insurance payouts, estate settlements, museum acquisitions. My name means what it means in this business because it has always meant one thing: what I actually found. Not what the client wanted, not what would have made my day easier, the truth of what was in front of me. The day I let a personal grievance into a professional judgment is the day I become someone whose signature doesn't mean anything anymore. And then everything before it means nothing too. I called my assistant the next morning and told her to schedule the Hargrove appraisal for the week after the wedding. That's the Hargrove collection, she said. Small town, small industry. She knew the name. Yes, I said. A pause. You sure about this one, boss? Same as any other job, I said. The week before the wedding, Reed called twice. Once about the rehearsal dinner, once just to talk. I could hear him trying. I kept my voice easy. I didn't make him feel what I was carrying. That's something a father learns to do. Paige called once, which surprised me. She'd never called me directly. She said, "Mr. Carver, I want you to know that I think what's happening is wrong." I told Reed that. Then, quieter, "He talks about you constantly, about the boats and how you taught him to read the water." She stopped. "I just wanted you to know." I thanked her. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand a while. I went to the wedding, not the ceremony. I'd given Reed my word and I kept it. But that morning he called at 7, and his voice broke on the second sentence, and he asked me, not because of any plan, just because he was 29 years old getting married and he needed his father. He asked me to please come to the reception. I put on my good jacket and drove to Annapolis. The venue was everything Nadine Hargrove would choose. White tents, chandeliers, a string quartet, every surface polished to a shine. I came in through the garden entrance as the reception was beginning, and I stood near the garden wall while the guests moved around me. Clive Hargrove found me first. He came across the lawn with purpose, then slowed as he got close. He stopped a few feet away, a tall man, permanently tanned the way you get from spending your life near the water. "Mr. Carver," he said, "I'm Clive Hargrove." "I know who you are," I said. He nodded, slow. "I owe you an apology, a real one. What I allowed to happen, it was wrong. I'm saying that before anything else, because I don't want it confused with the fact that you need my signature," I said. He flinched slightly. "Yes, that." "I got the letter from your attorneys," I said. "I know about the collection." He looked at the ground, then back at me, the look of a man who understands exactly what he costs himself and is paying it anyway. When I connected the name on the appraisal request to Reed's father, I didn't know what kind of man I was dealing with. Whether I'd use it, I said. "Yes." "Now you know," I said. "My appraisal will be exactly what I find. If there are problems, I'll say so. If the collection is sound, I'll say that. My work doesn't change because of how I've been treated. It never has." He was quiet for a moment. "That's more than I deserve." "It's not for you," I said. "It's for me." The reveal happened on its own, the way the truth does when it's finally let loose without anyone managing it. Reed saw me from across the garden and came over, Paige beside him. She hugged me before I could say a word. And then Nadine Hargrove crossed the lawn with her hostess smile, the practiced one she'd probably worn at 1,000 of these events, and she stopped when she reached us. She looked at me. She didn't recognize me. "And who is this?" she said brightly. Reed said, "Nadine, this is Gil Carver, my father." The smile held for half a second. Then Clive said quietly, "Gil Carver of Carver Marine Restoration." He restored the Meridian. A man nearby turned, silver-haired, jacket that cost more than most people's trucks. He'd been on the Maritime Museum board for a decade. His name was Hammond. He put out his hand and said, "Gil Carver, I've been trying to get you to our symposium for 3 years." 2 other guests turned. Someone mentioned the wooden boat show. Someone else asked about the Chris craft. Nadine stood in the middle of her perfect tent and understood, in real time, what her certainty had cost her. I spoke to Clive, not to her, quietly, just between us. "You've used the Meridian in your resort pitches. I know because a former client mentioned it. Said you called her the standard for restoration work on the Eastern Shore. I let that sit. You've been using my work to sell your properties for years, without knowing it was mine." Clive didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Nadine tried to recover. "I had no idea." "Nadine," Clive said. Just her name, the whole weight of it in 2 syllables. Reed put his hand on my shoulder and said, clearly, so the people nearby could hear, "My father's been doing work that other people brag about for a long time. I should have made that plain a lot sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." Whatever Nadine said after that, the room had already done the accounting. The appraisal took 2 weeks. Clive came to the Tilghman Island property himself the first morning. He was on time. He answered my questions directly. He didn't try to steer me toward anything. I'll give him that. And here's the part that proves what I said about my work. 9 of the 11 vessels were exactly what was claimed. But Vessel 7, a 1951 Lyman runabout logged as original, had hull modifications that post-dated the build year by at least 15 years. Whoever owned it before the Hargroves had altered it without disclosure. If I approved it at claimed value, the Hargroves would have collected insurance money on something they didn't have. That's not fraud if you don't know, but it becomes a very serious problem when the truth surfaces later, and it always does. I documented everything. The honest number came to $3.1 million. I walked Clive through the findings in my shop. He was quiet through most of it. When I got to the Lyman, he went still. If we'd filed at the original figure, he said. Your insurer would have paid it, I said. And eventually someone else would have looked at that hull, and you'd have been liable for the difference. At minimum. He sat with that, then, you could have just approved it. No, I said. I couldn't have. He looked at me. I was wrong about you, Gil. Nadine was wrong. And I let her be wrong because that was easier. Easier's not free, I said. That's a thing I've had to learn too. We shook hands and finished the paperwork. That's where the real work always happens. Reed set his boundary 2 months after the wedding. He told me about it on the phone, calm the way he gets when a decision is final. He and Paige had dinner with Nadine, a peace dinner Clive had arranged. Nadine, being who she was, had started to smooth it over without arriving at the word sorry. Something about wedding stress, about moving forward, about all of them putting it behind them. Reed set his fork down and said, I need to say one thing, and then we can move on. Nadine smiled her managing smile. You asked my father not to come to my wedding because of what he does for a living, Reed said. And that was wrong, and I won't go along with anything like it again. My father will be at every holiday, every dinner, every family event. That's not a negotiation. If that's a problem, we'll figure out what our relationship looks like from a distance. But his place is settled. Paige told me later that Nadine didn't have a response. She'd hit something she couldn't push past. Good. That's what a line is for. I missed the ceremony. I'll carry that. There's a particular thing about watching your son stand at the front of a church that I don't get back, and I know it. But I was there for the evening, and I was there for the moment that mattered. Reed standing in front of people who mattered to his wife's family, and saying out loud who his father was. Late in the reception, after the speeches and the dancing had wound down, Reed found me at the edge of the garden. He handed me a glass and stood beside me, and we watched the water for a while. The venue was on the bay, which felt right. I should have fought harder, he said. Yes, I said, you should have. He nodded. He took it the way a man takes something true without flinching. That told me I'd raised him right. It won't happen again, he said. I know, I said. We stood there a while longer. Below us, the bay moved the way it always does. Patient, unchanged, not caring who stood over it or what they'd been through to get there. A year later, on a Saturday in October, Reed and Paige drove down to the shop. Paige had been wanting to see it, where Reed grew up, where his father worked. She walked the length of the floor with her hands in her jacket pockets, asking about everything she saw. I pulled the canvas off the meridian for her. She stood in front of it for a long time. The morning light was coming through the windows, catching the varnish. And mahogany does something in that kind of light that I've never seen anything else do. This is the famous one, she said. That's her, I said. How long did she take? 5 years. Found her in a salvage yard. Most people thought she was too far gone. Paige studied the bow. Then she looked at me. What made you think she wasn't? I thought about it. You can tell, I said. If the bones are right, the rest is just time and work. Reed put his arm around her. They had news. They'd told me the week before on the phone, and I'd sat alone in the shop for 10 minutes afterward just breathing it in. May would have cried. I almost did. I covered the meridian back up and made us all coffee. And we sat at the workbench the way Reed and I used to sit on Saturday mornings when he was 10 years old. We talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. People ask if I feel vindicated, like I won something. I don't think of it that way. I didn't fight Nadine Hargrove, and I didn't punish Clive Hargrove, and I didn't use what I had to take anything from anyone. I went on being exactly who I'd always been, and eventually that turned out to be enough, more than enough, in a room full of people who decided it wasn't. There are people who look at your hands and make their verdict before you've said a word. You can't change those people. What you can do is refuse to let their verdict become your own. My worth was never in Nadine Hargrove's judgment of it. The boats I've restored are in museums and on the water, and in the hands of people who love them. The work stands without anyone defending it. It just needs to be done right. Same as anything worth doing, same as a man.